So here we are at Dinosaur Valley State Park. Right now, I am hiking up to the top of this hill, mountain, whatever you want to call it, plateau, so I can try to call my wife. Haven't talked to her since this morning. Service, not so great out here, obviously. I mean, what do you think happens? We don't just leave the camera in the middle of the forest. Apologize for the heavy breathing. It's been a long day. Weather here is in the 90s, hundreds with the heat index, and hiked about 7 miles, which isn't that much mileage. With the heat, that's pretty tough. We're in primitive campsite number 2, which usually has a nice little creek running behind it, but drought conditions for the last couple months made sure that that was not the case today. So I would be down there dipping my feet in the water if it was, but instead I'm still kind of melting and it's about 7 o'clock at night. So I mentioned that I would be hitting up the grand reopening of Prime Social. I actually missed it. Everybody in my family got sick, which is how it always happens. One person gets sick, everybody gets sick. It's the beginning of the school year, time to pick up some new viruses. So they've been reopened now for about a week, and I haven't been in yet, but I plan to rectify that very soon. Actually, right now.
So the first hand that we're going to talk about, we have 2 red jacks under the gun plus 2. We're playing 9-handed and we are in for 1,000. Under the gun limps, we raise to 20. Button, big blind, and under the gun call. The flop is king 4-5 with 2 spades. Now in a multi-way pot like this, we're going to want to check more because we are throwing away a lot of money by c-betting too frequently. However, I do want to c-bet this flop. It's a pretty good flop for my range, and if we down bet, we can profitably c-bet more often. After a couple checks in front of me, I go ahead and put in a bet of 30. It folds around to under the gun, who check raises to 75. This player in particular is a pretty gambly kind of player. I've already seen him show down some hands that would indicate that his ranges are pretty wild. Pretty much any 2 cards that are semi-connected and oftentimes not even suited. So given that this player is going to have a really wide range and is pretty unpredictable, has also showed a few pretty ambitious bluffs, I definitely want to call here and see what happens on the turn. So we make the call, and the turn is an offsuit ace. He checks, and we decide we're going to go ahead and check it back. So if he was looking to get a free card on the turn, he was successful. The river is another offsuit ace. This is an interesting card. It's pretty unlikely now that he has an ace. He could have a king, but I also think he's going to have a lot of hands that missed. The initial board was pretty draw heavy. I also wouldn't put it past this player to just have a small pair. So he leads out for 80, which is a pretty small bet. He's leading into a pot of 230. So not even half the pot, close to about a third of the pot. I think for a little while, and I'm probably going to fold here most of the time against average players or just typical players. But in this instance, I feel like this player is going to have way too many bluffs in their range. So in this case, I decide that I'm just going to have to call. So I go ahead and make the call. And it turns out it's a good call. He had 7-5 suited.
I swear I kept you on tens of jacks, something like that. Maybe a small bet.
You just didn't have me on being a calling station.
So in this next hand, we have pocket queens in the big blind. Early position raises to 15, and there are 2 callers before it gets back to us. Definitely want to go ahead and put in a 3-bet here. I made it 80. In hindsight, this was a little bit too small of a size. We are going to be out of position from the rest of the players, and ideally I would like to make it a little bit bigger here with the 2 callers in between. I think something closer to 100 would have been more appropriate. Late position calls and the other players fold. The flop is 10-7-4, all hearts. This seems like a pretty good flop for us to continue betting. I go ahead and lead out for 75, and the late position player calls. Turn is the Jack of Spades. Again, this card seems pretty decent for us. If our opponent has a flush already, we are drawing dead, but flushes are very hard to flop. We have to consider that many times here, he's probably going to have a hand with 1 heart in it. Could have the Ace of Hearts or the King of Hearts in his hand. Those will be a lot of the hands that he continues with here. So we definitely want to continue betting. The villain only has about 310 left. At the time, I was just kind of eyeballing it, and I counted that he had around 300. So I decided to go ahead and bet 300. I think that I really want to get the money in on this turn card right now. So if the villain does have a King of Hearts or an Ace of Hearts or maybe even a Jack of Hearts, that he will be more likely to put money in the pot. And he does. He goes ahead and makes the call. He actually has 310. So I go ahead and toss in the extra 10 bucks and we go to the river. The river is a 5 of clubs. I announce my hand and he says that we're good. He didn't show his hand, but he said he had the King of Hearts and a double gutter. So if we're going to believe him, it sounds like he had King 9 offsuit. Given the hands that we've seen at Showdown so far from our opponents, I am really liking the way that this game is going. So this hand is pretty interesting. I'm not super thrilled with the way I played it, but I will go over some of the reasons why I feel that way. We have pocket 5s in middle position. Player bets 15 in front of us. We call, and 2 players call behind us. And we get a flop of King 5-3, 2 diamonds. Very, very good flop for us. Middle set, there's a check in front of us. We go ahead and check. There are multiple players left to act behind us. We are hoping that somebody will put in a bet and we can start to build a huge pot with a check raise. Well, the late position player obliges and puts in a small bet of 15. There are 2 calls after his bet, so now it's on us and it's time to make this pot much bigger. We go ahead and bump it up to 100. Sizing here could be a little bit bigger, but I think it's not too bad. The late position player, who's the one that let out for 15, calls, and the other 2 players fold. The turn is a 7 of clubs. This seems like a pretty solid card for us. I think that a lot of our opponent's range will consist of kings, hands such as King Queen, King Jack, King 10, maybe some King X suiteds. This is the part of the hand where I feel like I might have made a mistake. I bet 275. In hindsight, I think that this bet was a little large because our opponent only has about $600 left, and I would have preferred to size a little bit smaller so that we could make a larger bet on the river. namely because I want to balance out some of my bluffs. On a flop like this, when I check raise, the only bluffs that I'm really going to have are going to be semi bluffs like ace X suited. I'd like to size my turn bet so that I can fire a third barrel on the river if I miss. But with this kind of sizing, I'm not really leaving myself the opportunity to do that if I am on a bluff, because I will only be betting 300 on the river, which is probably going to be an easy call for some of the hands that we would be looking to fold out. So note to self, pay attention to stack sizes more and size your bets accordingly. So the villain does call, and we go to the river. The river is pretty ugly. It's a 4 of diamonds, so now a flush is possible, and there's also a one-liner to a straight. Doesn't really make a lot of sense for our opponent to have a 6 here, or any of the other combinations that make a straight, but there is a semi-decent chance that he could have been drawing to a flush. However, since I sized the bet so large on the turn, I'm thinking that it removes some of the flush combos in his range, because I think for sure he would have folded some of them. So I'm leaning a little more towards weighting him as having a king. It's kind of an interesting spot. We could check call here and hope that our opponent will take some stabs with some hands that we beat. But I also think that since I'm weighting him towards having a king more often here than a flush, and definitely than having a straight, he's going to check back a lot. So the question is, the times when he does have a king, will he call if we put in our last 300? I think he probably will, because with a pot of 840, we stick 300 in there, he's getting some pretty good odds to call. And if he called a big bet on the turn, I think he's going to have a hard time letting go on the river. But it is kind of a scary card. It opens up a lot of possibilities. So maybe he would fold. Ultimately, I decide that the best course of action is to bet. Like I said, I'm not folding. I'm going to check call or I'm betting. Those are my two options here. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. If you want to put something in comments, let me know what your opinion is, whether a check call here or a bet is best. I just feel like a lot of times it's going to go check, check. And sometimes when I put in this $300 bet, I'm going to get called by a worse hand. He agonizes for many minutes, probably 5 minutes or so. He was debating on whether or not to call. He was asking me a lot of questions, trying to get a read. As this is happening, I'm getting more and more confident, because I'm definitely thinking that he's not going to lay down diamond flush or a straight. The only thing that I was a little worried about is that he might have a set of kings, but the way the pre-flop action went, I felt like it was probably not very likely that he had a set of kings. But it was the only hand that I could think of that he could have with this amount of deliberation that would have us beat. So in my mind, I'm still not sure if I want a call or a fold. Finally, he lets it go, and he says that all he had was a pair of kings, but that my river bet confused him so much that he considered calling. Interesting. He kind of went through his thought process a little bit. Basically, he said he put me on a set, so when I bet the river, he was really confused and considered calling, because he didn't think I would play a set that way. I think what he fails to realize is that I'm always going to check call here because of the size of his stack. So there is going to be some merit in leading out sometimes. If we were deep stacked, 1, 2K effective, then I definitely wouldn't lead out here. I would check and then consider calling. So in this hand, we have ace 9 suited in the hijack. There's a straddler, there's a limp in front of us. We go ahead and raise it up to 40. Cutoff calls, and then the straddler raises to 120. We call, and the cutoff folds, so we're going 2 players to the flop. The flop is ace 8-7 with 2 clubs. The straddler checks, and we decide that we're going to go ahead and check it back. We probably have the best hand here a good amount of the time, but we also don't really have a hand that we expect to get 3 streets of value from, So we check it back here with the intention of beginning to bet on the turn if the straddler checks again. The turn is a queen of hearts, but this time he decides he's going to lead out. He leads out for 150. It's about a half pot size bet. I don't think we have any other option here but to call, so we go ahead and put in the chips. The river is a 3 of spades, and this time the straddler checks. I think we could go ahead and put in a bet here, something like 200, and get calls from some hands that we beat, such as pocket kings or king queen. But I decided I wanted to go ahead and check back. I table my hand, and he says that we win. Shortly after, we pick up ace queen offsuit. We 3-bet to 35 from the big blind and get about 5 callers. The flop is queen jack 6 rainbow. We go ahead and lead out for 100, and we get 1 call from under the gun. The turn is a 3 of spades. We're going to keep firing at this. We bet 275. Again, under the gun calls. The river is a 7 of clubs. Under the gun only has 200 left. As I mentioned earlier, I need to work on noticing my opponent's stack size before I size my bet, because once again, I sort of put myself in an awkward position. The opponent only has $200 left and the pot is $925. Now, I'm going to go ahead and bet the 200, but it's just a little awkward to have such a small bet left on the river. Ideally, I would like to bring the bet size down for my turn bet. That way I could bet a little bit larger on the river. But it's not going to matter in this hand because the villain has king 10 offsuit, which he folds face up. So the last hand that we're going to discuss, we have 9-10 of spades from middle position. We open it up for 15, and a late position player re-raises to 55. We go ahead and call. We're playing pretty deep with this player, so I think that we have enough implied odds to make this play profitable. The flop is 3-3-10 rainbow. So we're gonna have the best hand here plenty of times, but generally I don't like to lead out into a 3-better. So I check. I'm gonna probably do this with the majority of my range. The late position player bets 100 and we call. With top pair, I don't think we really have any other choice. The turn is another 10. It's a 10 of hearts. So now we have a boat. This is pretty good news because a lot of the hands that he was beating us with on the flop, such as an overpair, are no longer good. We check, hoping that he's going to bet, but he smartly checks behind. The river is a queen of diamonds. We're going to want to get some value here. I think we can definitely get some overpairs to pay us off. There is a small chance that he just made a bigger boat with pocket queens, but if he re-raises us, we can always reevaluate and see if we want to call. So I go ahead and lead out for 150. Nothing to worry about. He just calls. That tells me we're probably good. And sure enough, when I show my hand, he says it's good and we take it down. So that's going to do it for our session at Prime. We ended up with a profit of $1,300, a great way to christen the newly reopened Prime. I'm super happy that this place is back open. It is one of my favorite places in Houston to play. The action is always super great, and lately the 5-5 no limit game has been pretty good.
All right, so before we wrap up this vlog, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about. I've got a plan for my next 2 videos, and unfortunately, they will contain 0 poker. I know some of you are probably going to be pretty disappointed, and I'm sure you just won't watch these videos. But the thing is, when I started this channel, I started it because I wanted something to put my creative energy into, and because I thought it would be a neat way to document a part of my life that I can always go back and look at later on. With that being said, I'm going on a pretty decent hike in about 2 weeks. I'm gonna drive all the way out to West Texas, and go to Big Bend National Park, where I'm going to be doing a about 30-mile hike on the Outer Mountain Loop, which is a strenuous hike through the desert and up into the Chisos Mountains. I decided I'm going to make 2 videos about this trip. The first one is going to be a pre-hike video where I'm going to talk about the trail and the park and also give a quick overview of my gear. And then the second video is going to be a vlog about my trip to the park. As I said, zero poker. It's going to be all about backpacking and beautiful views and just me in the desert. If that sounds boring or something that you're not interested in, then feel free to skip the next 2. I promise that after that, we will return to some poker vlogs. So the last thing I want to tell you about is that a couple weeks ago, I did an interview. This was the first time I've ever been interviewed in my entire life, as far as I can remember. And it was really fun, and we had a very interesting conversation. The channel is LO8 Grinder. I will put a link at the end of this video for you to go see it. And I would recommend that you subscribe to his channel as well. He's got a lot of good content. He's doing a bunch of interviews with many different poker vloggers, and they are long format and pretty interesting. I've watched a few of them, and I've definitely learned a thing or two about some of these vloggers. Today is Halloween, so I hope that you are having a great day. Maybe you'll get some awesome candy to eat later. Maybe you've got the perfect costume picked out that you'd like to wear to a party or just around the neighborhood, or maybe just around the house, you know? As always, if you liked this video and you want to see more videos like it, and apparently some other videos not so much like it, please like and subscribe.